Hello friends, I hope you are safe at your place and you are taking care of your family members. In this situation, pandemic situation of COVID-19, I am addressing you through an online mode of teaching. Let us start our first session in artificial intelligence. Because this is our first session, we will discuss artificial intelligence, and in that particularly we will discuss basics of AI, problems and state space search. As you are well aware, I am Professor Chirag Thakur and I am Professor and Head Computer Engineering Department, Government Engineering College, Rajkot. Friends, because we have started, we'll start with the definition, but before proceeding to our definition, we'll discuss the acknowledgement part. When I talk about this session 1, you can see the screen where I have acknowledged that I have taken content from book called Artificial Intelligence, 3rd edition by Rich, Knight and Nair. I have taken algorithms, points and figures from this book, and this is very much necessary in this era of intellectual property right and copyright. So when we move to this is the screen where you can see what points we are going to discuss in this session 1. We are going to discuss artificial intelligence, and we'll discuss problems, problem space, and we'll discuss portions of search. So by definition, what is artificial intelligence? So when you refer the book, it says study of how to make computers do things which at the moment humans are doing better. So when we talk about intelligence, there is a specific peculiar definition of intelligence. It says intelligence is nothing but ability to accomplish complex tasks. Oxford Dictionary says that intelligence means the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. But friends, you are well aware that nowadays a lot of research is taking in the place of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Some industry people also pays attention to deep learning. So in that case, when I look at a program which plays chess, it is called narrow intelligence. So before we proceed to the next subtopic, let us try to understand what is narrow intelligence and what is broad intelligence. So I can give you a few examples of narrow intelligence. In 1997, when the human grandmaster Garry Kasparov was defeated by a program, Deep Blue, that is the example of narrow intelligence, where the computer program, taking the help of the server part and petaflops of capability, it played the game of chess with the human grandmaster Garry Kasparov and defeated. And in March 2016, the Go champion Lee Sedol was defeated by AlphaGo. This is also the example of narrow intelligence. But then what is broad intelligence? So broad intelligence is sometimes called artificial general intelligence. They call it AGI. So it says general AI that is maximally broad is called artificial general intelligence. Or you can say able to accomplish virtually any goal, including learning, is also called artificial general intelligence. So what we try to aim is, we just try to aim human level artificial intelligence, in which we say ability to accomplish any goal, at least as well as humans, is called human level AGI, artificial general intelligence. Now before we move to the intelligence part and the related topics of discussion for today's session, let us try to understand what is our journey from data to intelligence. Now you know that we have got data, then we say information, then knowledge, and then intelligence. So data is plural basically. The actual singular word is datum and data is plural. So in any entity which is uniquely distinguishable is called data. Then your obvious question is, what is information? So when I put data together, and if I can infer some meaning out of it, if I process data together, and if I can extract or infer some meaning out of that data, it is called information. Then what is knowledge? When I put information together and that information which is accumulated sends some meaning, some kind of message, when it conveys some kind of message, it's called knowledge. And after knowledge comes intelligence. So knowledge is very important for us to understand if you want to understand intelligence. So there are certain less desirable properties of knowledge. The first and foremost property of knowledge is it is voluminous, and sometimes it is generated or it is stored in silos. Second, it is hard to characterize accurately. So when I want to characterize knowledge, it requires specific peculiar efforts to characterize them accurately. Third, knowledge is constantly changing. And fourth, it differs from data by being organized in a way that corresponds to the ways it will be used. What I want to convey is, when I put data, in what form or in what format I want to use it, that organization will keep on changing. So these are certain less desirable properties of knowledge. But when I put knowledge together, I get the ability to take certain decision. So when I process knowledge, and if it gives me the ability to take certain decisions, then that ability, that learning is called intelligence. So once we are very clear with our intelligence part, why do we want to learn? Because sometimes we want to characterize certain problems. Sometimes we want to solve the problem. Because when you imitate the human behavior, characterization, problem solving ability, these are certain things which you want your programs to imbibe. And as we have discussed in the previous slide, that at present what humans are doing, the computer programs, the computer system should be able to do. The complex ability or the problem solving ability of human should be imitated by the program. And for that, we need to solve the problem. The computer program need to solve the problem. And in that case, we'll call that program artificially intelligent program. So if I want to build a problem solving program, what do I need? So first thing first, I need to define the problem precisely. Second, I need to analyze the problem. Third, I need to represent the task knowledge, because every problem has a specific task. If I am solving a robotic movement issue, the task domain or the task knowledge related to that is different. But if I am solving a 15 puzzle or a chess program or a chess game, then the task knowledge is different. But if I am solving a water jet problem or some kind of other issue, the domain task knowledge is different. So represent the task knowledge is one very important component of building a problem solving program. And number 4 is choose and apply representation and reasoning techniques. So with respect to the problem, we need to choose the appropriate representation and reasoning technique. And once we choose, we need to apply the very same representation and reasoning technique associated with problem solving. So we'll discuss these points in greater detail in the next slide. So when I want to define a problem, how to build a system to solve a particular problem. So as we discussed, you have to define the problem precisely. So haphazard or vague definition of problem does not address the very first condition or requirement, that you have to define a problem precisely. So what do we mean by define a problem precisely? It says that definition must include precise specification of what the initial situation will be, what the final situation constitute. As I said, 15 puzzle problem or 8 puzzle problem. We have to specify what will be the first initial configuration, initial situation of that 15 puzzle board. And we also need to specify, what is the acceptable solution. From the initial configuration, from the initial setup, what is the solution setup, what is the solution configuration. There are certain problems where there can be more than one acceptable solution. And if our program achieves any of the acceptable solution, we can say that the target is accomplished. But for that, we need to define the final situation or final configuration which constitute all or one of the acceptable solution related to the problem. Then the second point is analyze the problem. If it is water jet problem, the analysis of that water jet problem would be different. If you are developing a program to play chess, then analysis of that chessboard and associated characteristics will be different. The third is isolate and represent the task knowledge. As I said, domain specific knowledge. And why? Because this task knowledge is necessary to solve the problem. And once it is represented, domain specific knowledge is represented, you have to choose the best problem solving technique and apply them to the particular problem. If I am solving 8 puzzle problem, then my problem solving technique includes moving the tile one at a time in such a way that I solve the problem. If I am making a chess program, my problem solving techniques includes the chessboard configuration analysis and then the move analysis. I have to choose a particular pawn and then I have to make a move as per the rules specified by the International Chess Committee. So once this problem solving approach becomes clear, we'll go to the first part, how to specify the problem. So friends, it is very clear that whether it is 15 puzzle problem or a chessboard configuration or a water jet problem, it has many configurations, it has many specifications, and the specification leads to them to a specific board configuration or tile configuration. And all these possible permutations and combinations of all these possible tile configurations or chessboard configurations is nothing but it forms state space. So 15 puzzle problem, every single configuration is one state, and when you make move, When you apply the rules, when you use the task knowledge, basically you move from one state to another state. When you are making a move in chess, the present board configuration is state, let us say state A. When I make the move, it becomes state B. When your opponent makes the move, it is state C. So all these possible chessboard configurations or 15 puzzle configurations, tile configurations, they form a state space. And when this space is very large, if we take the examples of chessboard, the state space is very large. In fact, if you analyze the 15 puzzle problem, if the branching factor is 18, and if you say that it's somewhere around 20 moves, or you are solving a Rubik's cube. So when you are solving a Rubik's cube, there are basically 6 sides, and with every side there are 3 possible ways to move. So 6 into 3 is 18. And if the moves are going to last for minimum 20, so the state space is 18 raised to 20. That roughly comes out to be 1.27 into 10 raised to 25. Very, very, very large number. And it is called combinatorial explosion problem. In the next session, when we'll discuss heuristic, we'll discuss this combinatorial explosion problem. So state space in such cases are very large. You are also going to specify the initial states, and then you are going to specify the goal states or the acceptable solutions. Like in chess, checkmate or winning for one of the player is goal state. If it is a 15 puzzle or 8 puzzle problem, then the final tile configurations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 1 empty is called the goal state. So there are certain problems which has got one goal state, there are certain problems which has got more than one goal states, and then you can specify the operations. As I said, in the case of chess, what you are specifying is, as per the norms, chess playing norms, you can take certain steps. So that moves are nothing but operations. Moving this tile from one place to another, one tile at a time, is nothing but the operation. That move is the operation. So that is also part of the operation of that particular problem. So when I specify the problem, then the next point is nothing but the production system. Now, as I said, production system talks about 4 main parts: a set of rules, knowledge or databases, a control strategy. And because we have knowledge or database, because we have set of rules, and because we have control strategy, the 4th component of this production system is nothing but a rule applier. So what is a production system? Let us understand. So it says it helps in describing and performing the search process. So production system consists of a set of rules. And in artificial intelligence, when we are discussing state space search, because we know what is state, we know what is state space, we have taken the example that if it is a Rubik's cube, then it is 18 raised to 20. If it is 15 puzzle, it is 10 raised to 13 states. Total possible number of exhaustive states are 10 raised to 13. If it is a 24 puzzle, it is 10 raised to 23 or 10 raised to 24 total states, exhaustive states. So we know what is state space, and because we want to go with the state space search, so we discuss the production system. We have already, if you look at the last slide, we could understand what is the problem, and before that we have discussed how to define a problem and what are the steps required to solve the problem. Now we have reached the production system. So production system says it consists of a set of rules, and we apply these rules to move from one state to another state. So each rule is made up of two sides, left side and right side. Left side determines the applicability of the rule. As I said, it varies from problem to problem. Water jet is different. Chessboard, the set of rules are different. And 8 puzzle or 15 puzzle, the set of rules are different. But left side determines the applicability of the rule. And right side describes the operation to be performed if the rule is applied. So on left side you says the applicability of the rule, and right side says what operation you are going to perform if I apply the rule. If it is a robotic movement, if I apply this rule, whether the robot is going to lift the end or whether the robot is going to make the forward movement or the backward movement, there are certain rules. If that rule is applied, the robot is going to shift 180 degree. So that is what I mean by applicability of the rule and the operation. So moving that robot is operation to be performed if I apply the rule. Then if we continue with that production system part, one or more knowledge or database that contains whatever information is appropriate for a particular task. Because if I'm in state B and if I apply this rule, this style rule or this robotic movement rule, I'll go to state C. So knowledge domain or database is where the information is appropriate for a particular task. If I want to take the task, what is the appropriateness of the information? And then it talks about control strategies. Now what does control strategy mean in problem domain? When I want to solve the problem, what do we mean by control strategy? So it specifies the order in which the rules will be compared to the database. Here we are going to compare the rules or rule set with our knowledge part or with our database part. And as we have discussed, the last is applying the rule applier. So there are two important messages here, important statements associated with control strategy, which I want to share with the class. It says the first requirement of a good control strategy is that it causes motion. And what is the second requirement of a good control strategy is it be systematic. So my control strategy should cause motion. It should move me, or it should move my program, or it should move my problem from one state to another state. Because ultimately we are in the initial states. We want to achieve the goal states. As I said, we can have one or more than one goal states or goal configurations. And in production system, when I want to apply this, the control strategy is there, rule applier is there. So my control strategy should cause the motion. That means ultimately with every single application of rule, as we have discussed in the last slide, left side and right side, it says applicability of the rule and the operation to be performed if the rule is applied. So when I apply the operation, and the control strategy says that in which rules will be compared to the database, it says it should cause the motion. It should take me from one state to another state. And second, it be systematic. It has to be systematic. So once we know this, there are two well-known algorithms to solve problems. Because we are discussing problem solving, so we'll take these two algorithms. And this is the slide in which I also made I specified that this algorithm text is taken from the book Artificial Intelligence by Rich and Knight. So this algorithm is called breadth first search. Basically what we try to do is we just try to make a search, and it's called breadth first search. So what we try to do is, we can see here, you can see the figure. So we'll first visit the first node, the root node, and then the next step would be visiting the left side. You can take the right side also, but conventionally we start with the left side one. So this 40 node, and this 03 node. So before we proceed with the second level, at one level we will exhaust all the available nodes. So the algorithm says that number one, create a variable called node list and set it to the initial state. That means we are going to create one list. It is called node list. It is a variable, it is a list, and we are going to store all the nodes into it, and we are going to set it to the initial state. Now what is the initial state? You can see the first root node here is the initial state. Now once we put that, the second state say until a goal state is found or node list is empty. That means either we have reached the goal state, the final one of the final configurations or one of the final states, or the goal state, or we have exhausted the node list. We are going to do the following task. What are the following tasks? They have been specified by A and B. What is A? Remove the first element from node list, because we have set the node list in the initial state. We have set the node list to the initial state. So take that node, first element from the node list, call it E, and if node list was empty, quit. So you take it, and if it is the only node, you take the first element and you call it E. And if that is the only node, and then after the node list becomes empty, then you quit, because it's end of the search. But if that is not the case, and generally it happens, it is not the case, for each way that each rule can match the state described in E, do the following task. Now what does it say? It says apply the rule to generate a new state. That means here you can see in the figure, this 00 node is the first. So we remove it from the node list, we call it E, and then we are going to visit this 40, the second node. So it says apply the rule to generate a new state. In this case, when I made the traversal, when I made the search, I found the second node 40, and I say it's a new state. Now if the new state is a goal state, suppose if it is the goal state, suppose here we can see that there is only two nodes, 00 and 40. In that case, 40 is the goal state. Tweet and return this state. If it is a goal state, then and return the state. Otherwise, add the new state to the end of node list. That means we are going to add this 40 to the node list, and then as A will take that node and will make 00, and then we will go to 03, and we will continue this. So our traversal, why we call it breadth? Because it's shallow search also, because what we try to do is we just try to visit all available tree nodes at one level. We do not proceed to the next level in the tree hierarchy unless and until we have traversed or we have visited all the nodes at that level. So here you can see that it is level 0 is the root node, level 1 has two nodes 40 and 03, and level 2 has 6 nodes, 4, 3, 0, 0, 1, 3, and then 0, 3 has 3 children. So for 4, 3, 4, 0 is parent node. So what we try to do here is we will visit this in a breadth analogy. We'll take the one level at a time and we'll try to visit all nodes and we'll just try to find out whether we have received the goal state or not. And once in that particular level we do not get the goal state, we move to the next node. Now there are certain advantages of breadth first search. Number 1, because we visit all the available nodes, BFS will not get, breadth first search, which is called BFS, will not get trapped exploring the blind alley. One specific street or one specific is called alley. That means we are not going to get trapped into one blind path, one path only. That is the case with depth first search. If there are loops in depth first search, it will get trapped in that street which is called blind alley. Number 2, the second advantage of breadth first search is if there is a solution, then breadth first search is guaranteed to find it, because anyway we are exhausting all nodes at all levels and then only we proceed to the next level. Then if there exists a solution, breadth first search is going to or guaranteed to find it. And if there are multiple solutions, then in the case of breadth first search, we'll get the minimum solution. What do we mean by minimum solution? A solution which requires the minimal cost or minimum steps. The third advantage of breadth first search is BFS guarantees that longer paths are never explored unless and until odd shorter ones are already been examined. We already discussed this. So let us move to the next algorithm. Now this is a different algorithm from breadth first search. Depth first search algorithm is, what we try to do is we just try to dive into the depth. So we start with the root node and we dive into the depth and we go till we get the leaf node. We just want to search the state space, and in that state space, which has been represented in this case using a tree, and these trees are having hierarchy with root node and children node and then grandchildren node. What we try to do is we just try to explore the state space represented here in the case of tree, and we dive into the tree starting from the root node till we take one branch at a time, and then we dive into till we get the leaf node, and then only we move to the next. So depth first search is like this. You can see here that from 0, 0 we'll go to 4, 0 and then 4, 3. We do not visit other equally placed node in the same level. Rather, we go one level down till we get the leaf node. Here also I have put that figure I have taken from the textbook. So let us start with depth first search. It says if the initial state is a goal state, quit and return success. But if initial state is not a goal state, and that is generally the case, otherwise do the following until we get the goal state, we get the success, or we exhaust all the nodes and we could not find the goal state. That's the failure situation. So generate a successor E of the initial state. And if there are no more successors, signal failure. So what we do is we take the initial state, we generate the successor. You know what do we mean by successor? Even if we take the previous figure, you can say that for 0, 0, 4, 0 is the successor. 0, 3 is also the successor. But in depth first search case, we take the first one, 4, 0 as the successor node. And then what we do? Generate a successor of the initial state. and then call depth first search with E as the initial state. That means in this case the 40 is the E, and then again we call the successor. Now when we again call the successor, if we go to the original figure, you can say that for 40, when we call it E and then we call depth first search, and depth first search says that if 00 is the E, then 40 is the successor. In this case our E has got changed, now it is 40. Then when 40 is the node or the E, its successor, when we apply depth first search, its successor is 43. That means we are going, as I said, dive into the depth. So what we try to do here is call depth first search with E as the initial. So when we call 40 as the initial, in this case 43 is the successor node. If success is returned, signal success, otherwise continue in the loop. So what is the loop? If you don't get these success, then you go back to 40, and then you are again, because your 40 was your E and you called the successor 43, and that is not the goal state, and the depth is exhausted. Now your E is not changed, it is still 40. So now again you put depth first search or the successor paradigm or part to 40, and you explore another node, that is 00. Again 00, you can see this, it has got no children, and it is also not a goal state. If it is not a goal state, then again your E is 40, and then again you call successor to this, because it is a loop. You can see here why I am describing this loop. You can see, do the following until successor or failure is signaled. It is a loop, and what you are doing is you are setting one node as the initial E, and then you are calling the depth first search as E as the initial state. In this case, when I put E as my initial, this is my 43 is my successor, but 43 is not goal, and it has got no children also, so I do not set it as E or initial node. Otherwise I could have set 43 as my initial, call it successor, if the depth would have gone further, but here it is not going further. So again I am returning to 40, and when I am returning to 40, which is my E, I call depth first search, and my depth first search says call successor. So in case of 40, again 00 is successor. Again 00 do not set as E, because it is not a goal state, and it is a leaf node also. Our E is 40. Again I call it, because it is a loop here. You can see here, do the following until success or failure is this. So if success is returned, you have to put the signal success, otherwise continue in the loop. And the loop says that I'll keep on calling 40, then 00, 40, then 13. Then from 40, because it is loop, I have exhausted the 40 all leaf nodes, I'll go back to 00, which was the initial state, and from 00 I go to 03. So that's how I run this depth first search algorithm. So what are the advantages of depth first search algorithm? Number one, DFS requires less memory, as only the nodes on the current path are stored. As I said, we are diving into the current path till we get the success or we get the leaf node. So breadth first search is all about exhausting all available states or all available nodes in case of the tree, because ultimately states are represented in the form of tree, and then we do the search. So deepest search is called depth first search. Deepest first search is called depth first search. So it requires less memory, because breadth first search has the tendency to exhaust all available nodes at a current level. So breadth first search is all about current level, level 0, level 1, level 2. Depth first search is all about the path, the current path, and all levels in that current path. So that is why, as I said earlier also, that breadth first search exhausts all nodes available in that particular level and then only proceeding to the next level. Depth first search requires less memory because it do not exhaust all nodes in the available level. Rather, it goes to the next level on the current path. So here it is also written that breadth first search, where all of the tree that has been so far generated has to be stored, because you are storing all the nodes at one level. So it requires more memory, and depth first search requires less memory. DFS may find a solution without examining much of a search. There is a possibility that depth first search may find a solution without examining this. Let us go back to this situation. Here you can see that if my goal state is 0, 0, or if my goal state is 1, 3, in breadth first search I have to, before visiting 1, 3, I visit 0, 0, 4, 0, 0, 3, 4, 3, 1, 3. But that is not the case with depth first search. So there is a possibility that without visiting major part of the search tree, there is a possibility that I may find the solution. But it contradicts with breadth first search, where all nodes of level n is examined before examining any node at level n plus 1. So before proceeding to level 2, I have to examine all nodes at level 1. Before examining to level 3, I have to examine or exhaust all nodes or visit all nodes at level 2. Then only I can go to level 3. So that is the issue with breadth first search. But there exists possibility of depth first search where we can find out the solution. It particularly significant that if many acceptable solutions exist, DFS can stop when one of them is found. In breadth first search, if the solution exists, we are going to find it definitely. If there are more than one solution exists in breadth first search, we are obviously going to find out the optimal one. Here it says if there are many acceptable solutions in depth first search, we will find out the one. We do not say optimal one. Why? Because when you go here, you can see that if 0, 3 is one of the goal state and 1, 3 is one of the goal state, in depth first search, we are going to go from 0, 0 to 4, 0, from 4, 0 to 4, 3, then again from 4, 0 to 0, 0, 4, 0 to 1, 3. And that 1, 3 is one of the solutions. But it is not the optimal solution, because optimal solution is 0, 3, because it is also one of the solution. As I said, there are two solutions, two goal states, 0, 3 and 1, 3. But if I take breadth first search, I'll first visit 0, 0, then I'll visit 4, 0, then I'll visit 0, 3. So 0, 3 is the solution also. It is the first solution we have encountered, and it is the optimum solution also in case of breadth first search. In case of depth first search, 1, 3 is one solution, one of the solutions, because 0, 3 is solution, 1, 3 is solution. So 1, 3 is solution, but I should not say, and I cannot say it is the optimum solution, because in depth first search, when I take the left branch and dive into that particular path to find out the solution, I cannot say it is the optimum solution. So that is the case, that breadth first search anyway guarantees the solution. If there are multiple solutions, the optimal one in depth first search, yes, you definitely get the solution, one of the solutions, but you cannot guarantee that it is the optimal solution. So friends, we stop here. Thank you for your attention. I hope you'll take care of your loved ones and you will put enough energy to study this content. And when we meet next time, that is session 2, we'll discuss heuristic search. Thank you. Take care.